Welcome to Chapter 3 of Module 5, where we're talking about the fluffy stuff, the mindset, and how we can make choices internally to improve our experience of our profession. And the next one that I want to talk about is unhelpful thought processes. Now, we're all guilty of these to some degree or another. There is not a single person on the planet who doesn't have some sort of whispering ear in their shoulder that tells them things that they might not always want to hear, whether they are helpful or not. That is the big question. So we're going to touch on a little bit of what you're likely to have going on. Not everybody experiences these things, and I want to be clear that it's totally fine if you don't. In fact, that may set you up with quite a few advantages, but as a stereotype, we as a profession are overrepresented at experiencing some of these thought patterns. And without going into oodles of academics, because there's plenty of that, we're really just going to focus on, well, what are some practical tools that you can pull out right now, today, to try to get on top of what's going on in your head that maybe isn't serving you anymore? It will come as no surprise to many that the first unhelpful thought process that I'm going to talk about is perfectionism. Yes, we are overrepresented both in the veterinary profession, but also, interestingly, in the animal sheltering space too. We have regularly worked incredibly hard to get where we are. And in a weird way, that sets us up for some of these less than helpful life skills, where perfectionism has helped us get to where we are, has helped us be successful and get the degrees, get the hard marks, get the jobs that we wanted. And to some degree, they are helpful at serving our patients because we go to the nth degree and we really want to do an amazing job and we do dig into every little potential question. The question becomes whether it as a life skill that moves outside of your clinical judgment is especially useful to you and whether it is serving you as a person, even if it's only sometimes serving you as a professional. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what even is it? Which I think is pretty much common sense. Okay. The second thing I want to talk about is, why is it problematic? And the third thing I want to talk about is, what are we going to do about it? So perfectionism realistically is the overarching need for people to get things right. And that isn't to say that there aren't lots of versions of right. There isn't to say that there aren't lots of versions of what's enough. It's that a perfectionist mind is much more likely to dwell on needing everything to be exactly right before they feel like the work is good enough, before they feel like the work is finished, before they can submit a project or answer a question. They have to know every piece of the puzzle and they have to understand everything that's going on, and they have to feel like their work is exceptional. Again, seems like a great thing, right? But there's a couple of reasons why it's actually really not helping us as professionals or as people. Firstly, because the pursuit of perfectionism is never fulfilled. Even if you create the most amazing work, even if that case was absolutely nailed, there's another one, there's another piece, there's somebody else who could have done it differently to you, there's somebody who has a thought process that works a bit differently, which is equally right. And if we are always striving for our work to be perfect, we will always be disappointed because there's going to be something that slips. There's going to be something that we haven't done perfectly, or we pay lots of attention to doing perfectly in the workplace, which means we have this huge amount of guilt that we're slipping in the home or in our personal lives or in our relationships. So it means that when we find ourselves constantly feeling like we're not managing something, there's nowhere for our brains to go with that. We're just constantly going that we've failed, even though, of course, you've succeeded at a vast proportion of things, a vast proportion of the time. But that one thing slips, and that's what your identity feels like it is railing on. Because if your identity is built around being excellent and doing an excellent job, one thing that is done imperfectly feels like a massive hit to your own personal identity, not just your professional success. The second reason that perfectionism isn't really great for us is that it usually hinders getting anything done. We're so focused on getting it done right that we very rarely get the thing finished in the first place. I have this amazing, silly example in my life of during COVID, a couple of friends and I did a paint by numbers, and one of my clever friends turned a photo of each of our dogs into a paint by numbers sort of canvas that we could paint while we were all having the standard COVID Zoom meetings with one another. And we sat and we chatted and we drank a bit of wine and we did the things. And I am by far and away the anti-perfectionist in the team. And, mine was messy. And I had to redo some bits because I missed over the lines, or I missed those two colors up, or I didn't use the exact color I was supposed to because I liked that one better. And the ears are lopsided and there's a kind of funny missing tooth in there. And when you get up really close to this bit of art on my wall, you can see that it's done by an amateur, that it's not a professional piece of art. The two friends who I did this with, lovely people, both excellent artists, look at mine and they refer to it as the ode to anti-perfectionism, because the honest truth is theirs are better than mine. They have perfect lines and exceptional colours and they look exactly like they're meant to, but guess what? Neither of them ever got finished. So of the three of our pictures, mine's on the wall and theirs is hidden in a cupboard somewhere still unpainted. So when we really think about who succeeded, there is only one of those images that did its job, that created joy and a lasting memento of those times together. Which brings me to the fact that if you focus on doing things so well that you don't get anything done, who is that helping? And the same goes, sort of related, but slightly different, is that if you have to wait until you have all of the information before you can make a decision, you're in the same boat. Because a lot of the time, both in clinical practice, in life, and in leadership, often no decision is the worst decision. So if you're stuck in a place of feeling like you can't act because you don't have the perfect picture of things, you're going to constantly be frustrated and feeling like you are out of your depth. There is clear and irrefutable evidence that perfectionism is linked with poor mental health outcomes. All right. Now, most of us feel like perfectionism either is or isn't part of who we are. We are either a perfectionist or we're not. And of course, some of us are naturally leaning one way, either through genetics and or the combination of genetics and our upbringing and our need to please. Some of us will be much more likely to lean that way than others. But like so many things in life, that doesn't mean that there's nothing you can do to change that and to learn this as a skill or unlearn it as a skill. And that means practicing anti-perfectionism. And the way you want to do this is by starting really small. Okay, the things that really matter to you right now, whether that's about how clean your house is, or whether that's about how much you impress your boss, or what exceptional clinical care you provide, don't mess with them just yet. I want you to start with small, actionable, and vaguely tolerable, even if somewhat uncomfortable, actions to practice anti-perfectionism. Some of the easiest are things like leaving a spelling mistake in your clinical notes. Don't go back and fix it. Send an email where you spelt regards wrong at the end. Everybody knows what you meant to say. It doesn't matter if it says ERG instead of EGR. My fingers type that wrong all the time. I want you to find small things. Leave one cup in the dishwasher before you empty it all out and rerun it. Just clean it twice. Or worse, leave one cup unwashed for no reason. Except that you can. Because who actually notices? Who is impacted by this? Absolutely no one. And as you move through the discomfort of finding those small, silly parts of your life where you can acknowledge that A, nobody noticed, and B, if somebody did notice, that person's a bit of a twit, okay? Because if somebody comments on your spelling mistake or on your missed cup from the dishes or on the fact that your kid is wearing mismatched socks, I think it says a lot more about them than it does about you. And once you start to get comfortable with the fact that it doesn't matter, then I want you to practice bigger. I want you to practice things that feel like they're encroaching on the things that really do matter to you. All right, I want you to think about, what would it look like to not dot every I and cross every T in every single email you send? Do a quick check and send it. Don't do a quick check and send it. What would it be like to have a totally unkempt yard for an entire month? What would it be like to eat with spoons instead of forks? Your children will not be traumatized. It's really about getting comfortable with the discomfort of the fact that good enough is good enough, because progress is much more important than perfection. And I know we all kind of know that academically, but we are still clinging to the belief that people will think less of us if we're not meeting those targets. And sure, many of us have developed that as a coping mechanism because of historical data that maybe proved that to us. But we're grown as adults now. And if the people in your life are actually judging you on your ability or inability to meet those targets and those impossible goals, again, that says more about them than about you. So it's time as an adult to start taking back control of the survival mechanisms that we developed when we were younger and start making a choice about these things. Second dysfunctional belief I want to talk to you about is imposter feelings. All right. Now, imposter feelings is one that I'm sometimes a little bit loath to focus on, because I have a personal belief that, particularly for women, this is talked about sometimes in an unhealthy way. Okay. It is true that a vast proportion of people experience something called imposter feelings. It's worth noting that it's not called imposter syndrome, even though that's the word we use for it all the time. It turns out that imposter syndrome is actually a legitimate condition whereby people take the identities of other people. So unless you're actually out there pretending to be a pilot when you're not, you probably have imposter feelings rather than imposter syndrome. But that's an aside. What it really is the feeling of constantly being worried that you are not good enough at this for people, and people will find you out soon. That you don't know what you're doing and you're just bluffing it, and that other people do know what they're doing and they're going to work that out really soon. And so it's a kind of fear of being found out that you are incompetent or that you are acting above your knowledge. That is a real feeling. It's an uncomfortable feeling. The reason that it frustrates me a little bit when we talk about it, and particularly when we talk about it in the nuance that is regularly talked about, that this is a condition that disproportionately affects women, is because we're talking about it as if it is a condition that affects women. And it is not a condition. It is a set of thought processes. And the example I want to give you is a slightly amusing one, but a real one nonetheless. I'm not making this up. In the 1850s, there was a real condition in medical journals called bicycle face. Yes, you heard that right, bicycle face. And the invention of the bicycle, well, the sort of two same size wheeled bicycles, had just become mainstream available to the wide population masses. And what the bicycle was offering was freedom. Freedom for women who historically until this point had been quite reliant on somebody pulling a carriage, or if they couldn't afford that, a male household member escorting them places, picking them up, taking them to places, walking them places, or on horseback. And by having the bicycle, women were suddenly mobile. They could get from their farms into the nearby village to talk to people and get their own things. God forbid, in the towns, suffragettes could meet together without their male counterparts knowing where they were going. It effectively gave women freedom that they had not experienced until now. And this, of course, is a risk to the patriarchy. And so they created, and I'm not even kidding, there is a genuine bona fide medical condition written up by medical professionals, i.e. the patriarchy, about how women, when they ride bicycles to excess, they get things like flushed cheeks and an angry scowl and, hard limbs. These things which are normal physiological reactions to exertion. They created a condition and they fear-mongered about it. Oh, don't ride your bicycle too often because you might get bicycle face, and no man wants to marry a woman with a hard stare and lean muscles. And to me, there is the risk that the more we talk about imposter feelings as a clinical condition and how much it affects women, we actually set ourselves up to let that keep us in our box. Instead, we can start to recognize uncomfortable feelings that our brain is telling us, oh, you're outside your lane, somebody's going to work that out, as a natural physiological response to being uncomfortable, to pushing yourself, to stretching outside of your comfort zone. In some cases, stretching out of the comfort zone where women overall have been historically. And so rather than feeling like this is something that abnormal that I need to treat, let's actually embrace those feelings as this is how I know that I'm trying something worthwhile, that I am stretching and growing and challenging myself and having a go. Because if you never feel these feelings, is that a sign that you don't have this condition, or is that a sign that you're staying safe? The third unhelpful thought process, which isn't really a thought process at all, of course, it's actually just a series of things that regularly go on in our head, really brings us back to what I was talking about in the previous module, is our unhelpful thought processes about other people. All right. And effectively, this is my way of just reiterating in another module that we get to choose how we interpret the actions of other people. And it's easy to believe that someone else can hurt your feelings, for example. But as it turns out, that old cliche that only you can hurt your feelings is technically truer than you think. Because when somebody says something either intentionally hurtful or you interpret it as hurtful, even if they meant it that way or not, what is happening is we create a series of thoughts about what they've said. And it is that series of thoughts that decides whether or not it hurts our feelings, right? So, your classic example is somebody says, asks you, oh, why did you do that about that case? And one person might interpret that as, oh my God, they hate me. Oh my God, they're judging me. Oh my God, I can't believe they're questioning my clinical judgment. And take that in a way that is quite hurtful and suggests a feeling of insult and creates a feeling of rejection or judgment. Where another person might take that exact same question, why did you do that about that case, to be genuine curiosity or genuine reflection, or I want to learn from you. The actual scenario that happened is objective. You don't know why they said what they said. You can interpret tone all you want, but anybody who's ever tried to send an email politely and somebody interpreted it as rude, we know that it doesn't matter how you intend it. It is being interpreted through a lens of what people are hearing. And that is the evidence that we have that somebody's words don't hurt our feelings. Our thoughts about those words hurt our feelings. So if we interpret something as a judgment, if we interpret our manager giving us constructive feedback as a fact that our manager hates us and they don't respect us and oh my God, I'm terrible at my job and all of these things, we turn that into something as opposed to somebody who goes, that was hurtful. I didn't enjoy hearing that, and that made me feel really uncomfortable and added to my imposter feelings. But I appreciate that my boss took the time to help me grow in this space because they're genuinely invested in my success. And so this comes back to the point I made earlier that if you don't know the assumptions, or if you're assuming intent behind what people say or do, you are putting a set of thoughts onto a scenario, and that is creating your emotional reaction. And of course, it's your emotional reaction that tends to dictate how you're going to respond to the situation. If you're feeling hurt and rejected and like nobody likes you, the next step that you take is going to be quite different if you're feeling a little bit embarrassed about that feedback, but feeling, the gift of feedback that it was given and that you appreciate that your boss probably felt awkward doing it and that they stepped up to do it anyway because they care and respect your professional development. So my point on this unhelpful thought process is, while it doesn't specifically belong in here, and a lot of psychologists don't put how we think about other people into a thought process bucket, I believe fully that whenever something that is frustrating us or is causing us an uncomfortable set of emotions is about something that someone else did, we have a lot more choice in that scenario than we want to believe. We want to believe that somebody hurt our feelings and it's all on them. But the truth is, there is almost no scenario on the planet that that is true. It's the thoughts that we create about what they did or said that hurts our feelings. If this is an area that interests you, you might like Brooke Castillo of the Life Coach School. There's some really interesting stuff which she refers to as the model, which is effectively exactly this, that our thoughts create our feelings and our feelings create our actions and our actions create our results. So if you're really looking for the best possible results, actually it's how do we change our thought processes, which then helps us have more self-serving feelings. And the last unconstructive thought process that I wanted to talk to you about is hopelessness. Now, this is a pretty controversial one in this day and age, okay? There's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in our profession. We talk sometimes about the negative narrative that is prevailing in the veterinary industry and often all through animal shelters about whether that's our profession is broken, everything's falling apart, big corporate, blah, blah, or my boss is a twit, or this colleague is a bully, or whatever those narratives that sort of are. It can spiral to a place of we feel hopeless. We feel like there's nothing I can do to make a difference. And there is clear evidence that correlates hope with resilience, right? And if you believe that there is no pathway forward, your likelihood of taking an action to try to change the future is much smaller. And if you're not taking actions to try to change the future, you become quite low and your feelings become quite unhelpful. So, firstly, I want to check that we've got the first right definition of hope because a lot of the time we use the word optimism, and optimism is also associated with resilience. But optimism is that belief that things will turn out right. And so we kind of keep trying and we'll keep giving stuff a go and we'll adapt. And, that's great. And optimism is good. The reality is sometimes it can feel hard to have optimism. So instead, we have a term which is sometimes referred to as realistic optimism or kind of interchangeable, sort of different nuances, but effectively, this is hope. And what hope is, rather than being, optimism, things will be fine, it is, I can see that there are some pathways towards this getting better. So it's not kind of, oh, yeah, it's great, it's going to be fine, right? It's, there are still avenues for this to improve. I can still see some light in these tunnels. And if you think about some of the scenarios we're in right now, whether it's capitalism and corporate veterinary clinics, whether it's the kind of spiral of animal welfare issues as the economy sinks, whether it's climate change, whether it's never-ending barrage of global politics, we can choose one of three options. Optimism and just kind of some naivety, head in this, it's fine, everything's going to be fine. We can choose naivety, head in the sand. No, I don't really want to talk about it. No, I don't really engage with that. Or we can choose the middle ground, which is there are some pathways by which this could get better. And so I am going to be involved in trying to make one of those happen. This is true in these big kind of geopolitical and big workplace and big profession spaces, but also in small areas of your life, whether it's a relationship, whether it's, a policy at work, whether it's an interpersonal conflict. We have to believe, in order to stay resilient, that there are pathways forward and that something that you do can make a difference. All right. So it's really important to take that belief and it gives you agency to act. And they've got really clear proof that people, for example, that do things like, go to rallies and pickets are happier and more resilient because they don't feel stuck. So you need to choose micro actions that you can do in the spaces that you believe in. All right. That might be a $3 donation. That might be sharing a Facebook post about a cause that you care about. It might be volunteering on a committee in your profession or in your workplace. It might be being a part of something, doing your part to feel like you are contributing to those maybe narrow pathways forward but it gives you agency and it gives you the feeling of more hopefulness. And then the more hopeful you are, the more likely you are to meet others who are hopeful. And then you've got some really good open conditions for social contagion of hopefulness. All right. So I am not suggesting that you want to be naive or unrelentingly optimistic about some of the stuff we've going on at a big level, at a small level, at a medium level. But I am suggesting that if you can see just one or two potential pathways for this to move forward, then it is your job to take small actions that feel appropriate and achievable to you to make sure that we stay on one of those pathways. And that will help you with those senses of hopelessness. In terms of useful tools for imposter syndrome to actually help you move forward, one of my favorite tools in this space is called the equal and opposite truth. And what that effectively means is not trying to change your belief system, okay? Because it can be really difficult to go from believing, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing, to, oh my gosh, I'm exceptional, I've got this. It's not really helpful advice, is it? So instead of trying to shift a belief where you are feeling like you're not ready for this or everybody is going to find you out as an imposter, instead, I want you to hold space for what you're thinking to maybe be true. Maybe you're not that competent at this. Maybe you are still making this up as you go along. And what else is true? So that might be, I don't know how to spay this rabbit. I've never spayed a rabbit before, but the clients are expecting, and I can't tell them it's my first one because they'll lose confidence. And I'm really, really scared that I have no idea what I'm doing. And I've spayed dozens and dozens of cats, and I've done a couple of superficial surgeries on a rabbit, and I've watched a number of YouTube videos on how to do this. I have the competence to make this work. If you're someone like me, I regularly stand up on stage in front of 500 or 1,000 people and look around me at the other people who are presenting and go, what am I doing amongst this cohort of people? I don't belong here. And I regularly receive really positive feedback about my presentation style and often get emails from people afterwards saying that it really made a difference in their lives. So both of those things can be true. And we call this the equal and opposite truth. So rather than trying to just push away a narrative that is unhelpful and like believing that we can toxic positivity our way out of this, accept it. Remember, we're believing this to be a natural physiological response to discomfort, which means that we're doing something hard and we're pushing an envelope somewhere. And maybe that's a great thing. So accept those uncomfortable feelings. And what else is true that can counterbalance that fact? And the third tool on this one is sort of similar, relates very closely, but it's about neutralizing negative thoughts rather than trying to positivity your way out of them. Okay. So if you think of one of the classic examples, many women may relate to this, but one of the classic ones that you might hear is around, people who have body image challenges and they are constantly thinking negatively about their body. You can't encourage somebody who hates their thighs to go from, I hate my thighs, I hate my thighs, I hate my thighs, to, I love my thighs, I have amazing thighs. It's not realistic. It's not how our brain works, right? But what we can start with is neutral. So rather than I hate my thighs, trying to move towards a place of, I have thighs. All right. And that involves whenever we have that negative thought set or that negative narrative, we interrupt that with yes. Yes, I do have thighs. That is true. So put in a thought there that is true and objective, right? Now, we do that for a little while, could be weeks, could be months, depending on how deeply ingrained our negative thought patterns are. And then we might be at a stage where when we think about our thighs, we're going, well, I have thighs. And now we are in a position to be able to challenge, well, actually, my thighs are very strong. And I have never had any health issues with my legs because of how strong my thighs have been my whole life. And see how we can, over time, by accepting a truth and shifting towards neutral, we have a chance of actually shifting even further than neutral. And so this is true in the workplace as well, okay? So we can take big thoughts that are quite negative My boss is an idiot. It's a common enough one. And rather than trying to convince yourself that your boss is the best person on the planet, we start with, my boss is a human. And convince yourself of that objective fact and cut off the negative one, not with a pretend falsehood, but with a true fact. My boss is a human. Now, if we can be gracious enough, we can hopefully one day move from neutral into, my boss is a human who had a really hard decision to make. And I'm not sure how I would have made a hard decision like that if I had to. Yeah. Or my work is awful. How do we go from my work is awful to my work is excellent? Well, we can start with either I have a job, okay? If you were in a position where that is a privilege for you, but many of us find that that teeters on, that unhelpful, other people have it worse, so you should be grateful, which isn't always a really helpful resolution. But we can go from, okay, I hate my job, to maybe the neutral thought is, I have options about my job. Again, so we're not trying to negate the fact that you're not loving your job. We're not undoing that fact. We're just providing another neutral fact. And by going from to I have options to move forward in my job, maybe eventually we can go, I have options to move forward, and this job has provided me those key skills which might help me at that. Do you see how shifting from negative to neutral is the first step in being able to shift slowly towards something that is not positive? Like I don't believe in having to turn everything into a good thing, but into thought patterns that actually serve us to move forward and serve us in a way that can help come up with solutions or bring us peace.